you've interviewed some amazing people on your podcast. Can you just go into some of the people you've interviewed, and what sort of advice sort of sticks out to you most? Is there, say, 3 things that have always stood by you every time you've done a podcast?
I think that there's I've always tried to find guys that were embodying this for themselves. The things that you and I are talking about here today, and they're usually quite different. So I've had musicians and artists, rock stars on the show. I've had Zen masters on the show. I've had, these super high achiever type guys on the show. I've had, Navy SEALs on the show. So it doesn't, and then I've just had guys that were just guys, and they went and did something pretty extraordinary. They're the guy that lives next door to you, and you don't realize that he did something extraordinary with his life. So I'm always interested in those stories. It's one thing when we hear about a Tim Ferriss or a Mark Divine or, one of these best-selling authors that comes out with these books and these ideas. We have a tendency to put people like that on a pedestal and remove ourselves of the personal responsibility that comes with it. It's like, oh, well, this guy says that, and that's great, and I can try to integrate some of that into my life, but not necessarily going to really hold myself. We don't see ourselves as one of those guys. We create this thing. He's one of those guys. I like to bring guys on the show that are just like you and me, that have been through some kind of adversity and then come out the other side. Because when that guy comes on the show and he shares his story, there's a part of us, if we're listening, if we're on the treadmill or we're on the bus or we're on our way into work and we're listening to that story, there's a part of us that goes, holy shit, that guy did that. I could do that too. And I find that that's far more powerful. It's far more powerful when we see ourselves in that guest and we recognize that there's another possibility for ourselves. So I love finding those stories, A, because it wakes me up, but B, because I know it's going to wake up the guys that are listening.
And is there any ones that sort of stick out in your mind just now? Is there ones that you could recommend for people to have a listen to?
There was a powerful story on. I had a guy, a coach that I know, came on the program. He'd been through just an amazing life. He in his teen years, he was very confused. I think he got into drugs and went down a really dark path with that as an addict. Cleaned himself up. As part of that lifestyle, he went into the gay community and then cleaned up his lifestyle, and then pretended he wasn't gay anymore. Started a family, had 2 boys, and then realized after I don't know how many years of marriage that he didn't want to go through that anymore. Decided to let go of the marriage, and then it was time for him to actually come to grips with that. He was a homosexual, and so his big fear was telling his 2 sons, that he was a homosexual, and he was terrified. And I think that even if, most of us are going to have a hard time relating to that story, for one, but number 2, we can relate to it because there's a thing in us that if we felt like if the people around us knew this thing about us, they'd leave us. They'd be terrified of that. And I just remember doing that story, sharing that guy's story, and having so many people just be like, man, if that guy could have that conversation with his sons and have his sons come out the other side, like, no big deal, Dad. Like, we're still here. Like, everything's great. Like, it just was a huge weight that lifted off of this guy's shoulders and opened up such a new realm of possibility. Well, that kind of stuff, like just being willing to be honest with ourselves and being honest with the people around us opens up so much more possible for us. So many of us are living in a tiny little box because we think that that's how we have to live in order to be loved and accepted. And it's just not true. So that was the first story. Then there's been so many, but that was the first story that jumped out when you asked me the question.